Are you challenged with hypertension and living in Trinidad and Tobago? In Trinidad and Tobago, our dishes can be considered to be not very hypertensive friendly, at least most of them. In this video, I am going to be highlighting 5 dishes that if you are hypertensive or struggling with high blood pressure, you may want to take a second look at these. Coming up. Hi, I'm Howard Spencer of Spencer's Whole Food Plant-Based Eats and Treats. In Trinidad and Tobago, high blood pressure can be considered a serious and an urgent problem. It is so much of an issue that a Joint Select Committee, specifically the Joint Select Committee of Social Services and Public Administration, was given the mandate to look at non-communicable diseases, specifically the response of the country to this burgeoning problem, especially the health professionals and the public at large. The chairman of this select committee, Dr. Paul Richards, in a recent meeting with various stakeholders, which included employees of the Ministry of Health and the various regional health authorities, highlighted some concerning statistics regarding hypertension.
PAHO says that Trinidad and Tobago is one of the countries in the region with the most cases of arterial hypertension. It reported the Caribbean has the highest rates of hypertension, accounting for a quarter of the population. But Trinidad Tobago has an even higher hypertension number than the overall region. It reported that while the Caribbean has a 23% of rate of hypertension compared to 17.6%, that's just over 6% difference, while TNT has a 25.8% overall rating, 29% in men and 23.7% in women. Why is Trinidad and Tobago's numbers trending in that direction?
This was supported by a recent presentation by Dr. Abdul Hamid in one of the town hall meetings with the public and the Joint Select Committee in highlighting the seriousness of hypertension in Trinidad and Tobago.
Hypertension, Trinidad and Tobago, of the adult population, which looking at approximately 1 million persons, 26.3% of the population has elevated blood pressure. We could round that off to about 30%, and that means we have 300,000 people right now in this country walking around with high blood pressure. Even when we have large-scale public screening activities, that goes up to approximately 50%. And of those 300,000 persons, only half of those persons know that they have high blood pressure and are being treated or are taking treatments or are doing something proactive with. So we have walking around everywhere, we have tens of thousands of people who don't know their status. And that is something that we as a nation, we need to fix.
Well, it now brings us to this question. Why did we as a nation reach to this point where we have over 300,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago living with this disease or being challenged with this disease? I have tried to address this question on numerous occasions. Here is one video in which I give my answer with regards to why there are some places in the world which seem to not have this problem with regards to chronic disease and tend to live long and vibrant and healthy lives, while other regions in the world tend to suffer with chronic disease and poor longevity. In that video, I referenced the work of National Geographic Fellow and author of this book, The Blue Zone Solution, Dan Buettner. Now, Dan Buettner has gone in various regions of the world and looked at how regions in the world where they tend to live long and very healthy and vibrant lives, where people are like springing towards the 80s and 90s and 100s, what were the common threads in those zones that help these people to exhibit longevity and to exhibit vibrancy in that longevity? Now, one of the things which Dan Buettner realized in all those zones in which people tend to live long and healthy and vibrant lives was the power of the environment. Just to show his perception about environment and how it contributes to the health of an individual or community or a nation or a village, he goes at great lengths to talk about how the environment plays a big role in determining the health of the population, and not because of a concept that a lot of politicians and medical professionals like to put forth. I will come to that in a little bit. Just to highlight his perception of the environment. We need to become aware of the influence of the environment. That radius of 20 miles or so from our homes where we shop, work, walk or drive, attend school, eat at restaurants, and spend most of our lives. Here within this zone is where we are constantly nudged into healthy or unhealthy choices based on the norms and habits of the people around us, the laws and ordinances of our community, and the decisions that have been made, conscious or not, about all the healthy features that make it a healthy place to live or not. Now, just to give some perspective with regards to this 20-mile radius that Dan Buettner speaks about, what he is trying to reference here is he's trying to reference that your immediate environment in which you take part of or which you are a part of each and every day, there are choices that you make each and every day in that environment that determine the trajectory of your health. And just to put that into Trinidad and Tobago perspective, 20 miles in a small nation like Trinidad and Tobago can take a big chunk of the landmass. Just to show you, let's take San Fernando as the beginning point where we're going to draw that 20-mile radius. From San Fernando to Point Fortin, it's just over 20 miles, where it is just 21 miles, so 1 mile over 20 miles. From San Fernando to Rio Claro, it's 26 miles, so that is just 6 miles over. So you can say anywhere in between New Grant and Rio Claro, that is where the 20-mile mark is. And let's say we are to go up north now. San Fernando to Shogunas is just under 20 miles. So as you can see, that 20-mile radius where San Fernando is considered the center point, as you can see, takes up quite a substantial chunk of Trinidad and Tobago. And you can be rest assured that this 20-mile radius from San Fernando, there are lots of people making choices each and every day which determine the trajectory of their health status. And if one was to visit or reside within this 20-mile radius, you can see that there are quite a bit of factors that contribute a large part to the health status of the nation today. And it's not just unique to San Fernando. This 20-mile radius can be applied to Port of Spain, Toco, Sangre Grande, wherever you go. It is pretty much a similar environment within a 20-mile radius in Trinidad and Tobago. And once you encounter that 20-mile radius, you can see where the leaning is towards with regards to either health or ill health. So we have a nation in which the amount of people who are challenged with hypertension is just over 300,000 people. And usually what tends to happen with regards to the solution being put forth is that, especially when it comes to politicians and medical professionals and the public at large, the rhetoric that seems to be put forth there is that your health, as in like the reason why you are hypertensive or the reason why you're suffering from a disease, it is because of personal responsibility. As in, you are responsible for what you put inside your mouth. You are responsible for what you eat. You are responsible for the choices that you make. And I have said in previous videos that we don't think it that way. Because if it was a matter of personal responsibility, we would not have over 300,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago being challenged with hypertension. There has to be a much bigger driving force that is causing this epidemic of hypertension and overall this epidemic of ill health and chronic disease in the nation. So I believe it is not a matter of ill health, but it is a matter of the environment in which we live in. As we say, that 20-mile radius, that immediate environment that we live in, that environment plays a much bigger role in determining our health, whether it be on an individual status, on a community level, or on a much wider scale. The environment plays a much bigger role in whether you are living a healthy life or whether you are living an unhealthy life. And when it comes to hypertension, it is my belief that it is because of the food environment that we encounter each and every day in that 20-mile radius and even beyond that plays a major role in our hypertension numbers. Because when you really check Trinidad and Tobago's cuisine in general, Trinidad and Tobago's cuisine is a very popular cuisine. It is essentially a well-known type of cuisine. But what makes it lean towards ill health is because a lot of the foods that we have tends to be high in salt and high in fat. But for the purposes of hypertension, I want to focus on the salt aspect of it. Now, usually when you're hypertensive or you are being challenged with high blood pressure, one of the things that the doctors tell you to do is that you must monitor and cut down on your salt intake. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, that becomes very difficult because unlike other places where salt is in ready-made food, as in like canned goods or frozen goods, in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of our dishes tend to have salt added to them and tends to have ingredients in which there is a lot of sodium in them. And in this video, I'm just going to concentrate on 5 of those foods in which, if you are hypertensive or if you are challenged with high blood pressure, these are 5 foods which, in my opinion, you should really take a good hard look and really take a hard pass on. The first food which I want to look at is Pholourie. Now, Pholourie can be considered as snack-sized dough balls, where these dough balls are essentially made with split peas flour, regular flour, various seasonings and spices, and they are mixed together to form a thick batter. And then that thick batter is deep fried until it is crispy on the outside, yet light and fluffy on the inside. This tends to give it a much favorable texture and a much better chew, a much more mouth-pleasing chew. And these dough balls, this Pholourie, tends to be served with chutney and pepper sauce. Now, one thing which is you need to note is that chutney and pepper sauce, usually by their very nature, tend to have high amounts of sodium in them as well. Now, one of the things that what tends to be overlooked by a lot of Trinidadians is how much sodium is consumed when you are eating these foods on a regular basis. A 100-gram portion of Pholourie can range between 315 to 1,350 milligrams of sodium a day. Now, people might say, well, what's the big deal in that? One of the things that people need to understand with regards to sodium is that when sodium is consumed, when you consume too much sodium, the body goes through various sort of processes in order to get rid of that excess sodium. And one of the side effects of consuming too much sodium is that your blood pressure rises in order to try to get rid of this excess sodium. Usually, one of the recommendations from the American Heart Association is that that you are supposed to consume 1500 milligrams of sodium a day or less. The American Heart Association recommends this limit for people who are of African descent or who are of Black heritage or people who are hypertensive. And it is usually a recommendation made for the general population, but especially for those demographics. Now, with regards to that 1500 milligram limit imposed by the American Heart Association, when it comes to Pholourie, that is between 20 to 90% of that 1500 milligram limit recommended by the American Heart Association. So 100-gram portion of Pholourie can take you anywhere to like 40, 50, 60% of your 1500 milligram limit. That is if that's a target you're looking at. And that's from 100-gram portion, which is not a whole lot of Pholourie. This is like about a quarter pound or thereabout, which is about 3.5 ounces. Not a whole lot of Pholourie. Most people can tend to eat almost 200-gram portions of Pholourie if given a chance. The second one, Saltfish Buljol.
All saltfish sweet.
Chef.
Now, saltfish. Let's take a look at Buljol, or where does the name Buljol comes from. This will tell you something about the dish. Now, Buljol comes from the French dialect or patois term called bulgur, or it is translated as burn mouth. Why is it called burn mouth? Because this is due to the amount of pepper that is actually added to the dish. So therefore, this dish is a very spicy dish, and it is a very well-known breakfast in Trinidad and Tobago. It tends to be eaten with bake, bread, and crackers, and so forth. Very popular. Now, as you can tell from the namesake, Saltfish Buljol, you need to have saltfish added to it. Now, saltfish, as you can tell from the very name of it, it is loaded with salt. It's almost like every fiber of that saltfish has salt in it. Just to put things into perspective, a 56-gram portion of saltfish can have over 3,000 milligrams of sodium in it, which is twice the American Heart Association target. However, what is done to get rid of that excess salt? There are two ways to do it. One of the ways that is the saltfish is prepared to get rid of that excess salt is that it is soaked in hot water overnight, or if you are short on time or you haven't done the soaking overnight, you can boil the saltfish for between 15 to 30 minutes. However, this saltfish is so salty that even with the boiling or the soaking in hot water, 100-gram portion of Saltfish Buljol ranges between 650 to 1,000 milligrams in a quarter pound of Saltfish Buljol. That is between 40 to 70% of the 1500 milligram limit recommended by the American Heart Association. Smoked herring. Now, smoked herring, just like saltfish Buljol, it is usually made with processed fish. Now, smoked herring is a processed fish that is salt cured and liquid smoke is usually applied to it. So it tends to have that sort of smoky flavor. Now, what was done with smoked herring is, like saltfish Buljol, it is boiled for some time before the other ingredients are added to it, like the vegetables and so forth. This tends to have an effect of getting rid of the excess salt and making it easier to shred so that you can have the dish looking like what you see here on this slide. Now, given the processed nature of the smoked herring, a 100-gram portion of smoked herring can have a sodium content of 850 to 1500 milligrams of sodium in it. So therefore, a 100-gram portion of smoked herring can take you between 60 to 100% of your 1500 milligram American Heart Association target. And that's just from the smoked herring alone. We haven't accounted for the bread that is used to eat with the smoked herring, and we haven't added the condiments that is usually added to the smoked herring, because a lot of Trinis, we tend to like foods with sauces added to them. Ask anybody who eats doubles at the side of a road on a regular basis. Number 4, macaroni pie. A macaroni pie is a Trinidadian favorite. It is a food that, if you are of Trinidadian heritage, wherever you go in the world, you will have heard about, or you'll have had some relative talk about macaroni pie. And I'm sure if you are living in Trinidad and you have family living away and they tend to come down to Trinidad, one of the things that they tend to look forward to is this dish, macaroni pie. Because macaroni pie is a Trinidad and Tobago comfort food classic. I'm pretty sure for people who have family, as I say, anywhere in the world, but usually tend to have Trinis living in the US, Canada, UK, up the islands, and so forth, one of the things that they would try to make, or if they can't make it, one of the things that they yearn for is this macaroni pie because of how delicious it is. And I could tell you that from experience. Now, how macaroni pie is made is that it's essentially similar to a baked macaroni and cheese casserole. However, giving it that similarity will be doing it an injustice, because with macaroni pie, the cheese is not melted beforehand. What happens with regards to macaroni pie is that the cheese is grated or shredded. And then once the cheese is grated or shredded, the boiled macaroni is mixed with eggs, the grated cheese, evaporated milk, salt, and white pepper. Usually all that is mixed together in the pot, and then it is transferred to a baking dish. And then, as you can see on the slide, you see the pie has sort of like a yellow golden crust. Now that crust is made from layering the top of the macaroni with a layer of cheese, and then you put it in the oven, and once it is cooked in the oven, that golden yellow brown crust that you see here on the slide, that is how the crust is made to get that characteristic crust that many people in Trinidad and Tobago associate with macaroni pie. Now, one of the things that people need to be aware of with macaroni pie is that because of the ingredients used to make the macaroni pie, if you are hypertensive, this is something which I would really advise you take a rain check on, because a 100-gram portion of macaroni pie can have a sodium content of between 180 to 1250 milligrams. And I have some more bad news for you. Macaroni pie is usually tend to be made with a lot of salt, a lot of cheese, and a lot of fatty foods. So therefore, you can expect that a 100-gram portion of macaroni pie will traditionally tend to be in the upper range of the sodium content. So it could be anywhere from 800 milligrams, 900, 1000, and so on. So if you are consuming macaroni pie, one of the things that you need to be aware of with regards to macaroni pie is this. One of the main ingredients with making macaroni pie is cheese. Now, cheese in and of itself tends to have a lot of salt and it tends to have a lot of fat in it. And then when you couple that with the evaporated milk and the eggs and so on, and the salt, added salt it, what tends to happen is that you tend to have these ingredients added together, which increase the amount of fat and increase the amount of salt added to it. So therefore, what tends to happen is that because of this compounding action taking place with the macaroni pie, you can have sodium values like this. Now, in this slide, I didn't add the amount of fat to it, but one of the things that I just want to quickly put in here is that fat also tends to play a part with regards to high blood pressure. Fat tends to make your blood viscous, and if your blood is viscous, it makes the blood harder to move. So therefore, the heart needs to pump harder in order for that blood to reach where it needs to reach. So just to keep that in mind, I will go further into that in a future video. Number 5, Pelau. Now, a lot of people will be disappointed in this, but this is something which I need to let people know what's up. Now, Pelau is essentially a rice and peas dish. It's a savory one-pot Trinidadian meal favorite. Just like macaroni pie, a lot of people from the whole Trinidadian and Tobagonian diaspora go in the US, UK, and so forth. If you have anybody of Trinidadian heritage, they will tell you that Pelau is one of the must-haves in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, how traditionally Pelau is made is that the meats, such as chicken and beef, is first browned using, well, some people will say burnt sugar, but it's really like caramelized sugar, as in like sugar which has been melted down, and it starts to turn slightly brown. And then once that happens, then the meat is thrown inside the pot and it's mixed together with that burnt sugar to give it that characteristic brown color that you see here in the slide. And then once the meat is added and it's brown and so forth, the rice, the herbs, the seasoning, spices, the peas and beans, veggies, and coconut milk, they are added afterwards. Most pilau tends to be made with peas, what is known as pigeon peas. And this is the type of peas that you see here in the picture here. But you can change the beans to whatever beans you want. One of the most prevalent traditions with regards to, well, Old Year's going into New Year's is to make pilau with black eyed peas. So you can tailor it to whatever you have in your pantry or your kitchen or whatever fancies or suits you. However, the bad news is that a 100-gram portion of pilau can have a sodium content of between 260 to 330 milligrams. Now, people might say, well, 260 to 330, look, I will go with that. Given the high numbers that we had for other food items that I mentioned before, such as macaroni pie and so forth, 260 to 330, I will take that. But here's the thing. A 100-gram portion of pilau is not very much. There will be people who will tend to eat 2, 3, maybe even 4 times as much of that, because there are people who tend to eat a whole full plate of pilau. And in many cases, people go for seconds depending on how good the pilau tastes. So people can have 4, 3, 4, 5 times that 100-gram portion that is mentioned there. So let's say you happen to eat a pound of pilau. 1 pound of pilau, you multiply that by 4, that would be almost or more than 1200 milligrams of sodium. So therefore, you almost close to the limit that is recommended by the American Heart Association. So while if you restrict yourself to a 100-gram portion of pilau, it may not be as much, but usually when it comes to pilau, because pilau, it's almost like Pringles. Once you get into it, you can't stop. that's one of the things I will tend to recommend with Pelau. If you really can't control yourself with Pelau, or if you don't have the strategy of, taking just 100 grams of Pelau and mixing other things with it, like vegetables, starchy roots such as potatoes, sweet potatoes, yam, cassava, eddos, and so forth. All of them, once they cooked unsalted, that is where I would say, okay, it will be feasible to have pilau. But usually in most cases, that is not the case. People tend to have 200, 300, 400-gram portions of pilau. So if you're somebody who really cannot control yourself with regards to pilau, I would advise that you take a rain check on eating pilau. So in short, those are the 5 foods that if you are hypertensive and living in Trinidad and Tobago, I will advise that you stay away from. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can never, ever, ever eat these food items. No, I will never say that. However, if you are somebody who cannot control yourself with regards to these foods, or you find these foods too addictive, well then it may be advisable to kind of stay away from these foods for a while. Now, one of the tips and tricks that I can tell you with regards to these foods so that you can enjoy some of the foods without going over that 1500 milligram American Heart Association limit is if you pair the foods with foods which are low in sodium. Foods which are naturally low in sodium are plant foods, fruits, vegetables, starchy roots, whole grains, and so forth. Once they are cooked without salt, or if they are cooked with some kind of salt substitute, those are acceptable ways that you can enjoy these type of foods without having the high salt content in them. If you want me to give examples of how these foods can be enjoyed without maxing out on your sodium intake, put in the comments below your desire for that, and I will try my best to accommodate you. Now, if you want to see how salt or sodium, how it affects your blood pressure, I did this in a video before. You can check that out right here. And if you want to see what is the whole purpose behind Spencer's Whole Food Plant-Based Eats and Treats, especially regards to how we see food as an agent for change in the food environment, I put that right here. So feel free to check out these 2 videos, and I'll see you in the next one.